They didn't see him coming, not because he was hiding. No, he stood right there in plain sight, but because their eyes were trained to overlook people like him. The engine was still cooling when suspicion pounced, disguised as protocol. It started with a glance too long, a question too sharp, a tone too certain. A man, a machine, and a moment misjudged. But this wasn't just a traffic stop. This was a slow detonation. One spark of prejudice lit beneath decades of silent restraint. What they thought was a routine check spiraled into a national flashpoint, not because of what he did, but because of who he was and who they failed to recognize. Power had never looked so ordinary, and that's exactly why they missed it. By the time the truth surfaced, reputations had burned, laws had shifted, and the world had watched every second unfold, frame by incriminating frame. If you're drawn to stories that don't just entertain, but expose, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and tell me, how quickly would you have seen the truth? The sunlight glinted off the polished chrome as Judge Kevin Wallace pulled the 1967 Mustang into a spot near the front of Riverview Commons, the kind of boutique shopping center that practically screamed gentrification. The car purred to a stop, its engine humming with that deep, unmistakable growl of classic American muscle. Kevin sat for a second longer, both hands resting on the wheel, taking in a moment. This car had been his father's legacy, a restoration project that had bonded them for years, long drives on lazy weekends, grease-stained hands, old jazz records drifting from the garage radio. It wasn't just transportation. It was memory made metal. He killed the ignition and stepped out, dressed in dark jeans and a navy blazer, casual but sharp, weekend mode but clean. To anyone passing by, he could be an off-duty professor or a consultant on a rare break from his phone. No robe, no courtroom, just a man on a sunny Saturday. He'd barely shut the door when it started. Step away from the vehicle now. The voice cracked like a whip. He turned and saw her, Officer Patricia Monroe, white mid-30s, hand resting on the butt of her holstered weapon. Her eyes locked onto him with practiced skepticism. Her partner was still getting out of their cruiser across the lot, but Monroe had already decided she didn't like what she saw. Kevin raised one hand slightly, palm forward, brows lowered in measured confusion. "Excuse me." She advanced, slow and deliberate. "I said step away from the car. Do it now." The shift in the air was immediate. Conversations hushed. Footsteps slowed. Kevin glanced to the side and saw the first phone lifted. Teenager, oversized hoodie, already recording. The incident had begun. He stepped back one pace from the car, posture loose, voice level. "Is there a problem, officer?" "This vehicle matches a stolen property alert," Monroe said, circling the Mustang like it had insulted her mother. "I need you to place your hands on the hood." "A stolen alert?" Kevin asked, incredulous. "I can assure you this vehicle, hands on the hood." Her tone was loud, not for him, but for the growing audience. Two shoppers nearby paused in front of a candle boutique, whispering. Kevin exhaled. Calm, always calm. He placed his hands flat on the sun-warmed metal, the same hood he and his father had spent a summer sanding and repainting. Behind him, the plaza shifted. More phones, more whispers. An older black woman in a church hat stared hard, hand tightening on her purse. Officer Monroe moved closer, now just a few feet away. "This your car?" Kevin nodded slightly. "Yes. It was my father's. It's been in the family since he bought it in '67. "Right," she said, voice dripping with doubt. "And you just happen to be driving it around this side of town in casual clothes. No plates on the front, no sign of ownership." "There's a valid registration," Kevin said evenly. "Inside the glove box. If I'm permitted, you're not." She cut him off. "You can stay right where you are until backup arrives." Her radio crackled. She pressed the button, reporting a possible vehicle theft, requesting immediate support. "Suspect is non-compliant," she said clearly. Kevin felt the words like a slap. Non-compliant. He hadn't moved. He hadn't resisted. But already, the narrative was being built. It wasn't what he did. It was what they chose to say he did. Another voice cut in, a young woman across the lot with her phone held high. That's a judge. I've seen him on TV. Her friend elbowed her. Shook, just keep filming. Monroe didn't blink. Let me guess, she said loudly. You found the car unlocked, keys inside, figured it was a gift. That it? My name is Judge Kevin Wallace, he said slowly, of the Superior Court. I can provide identification. Don't move, she barked. Keep your hands where I can see them. The sun beat down on his neck, sweat forming under his collar. Kevin stayed still, the same stillness he practiced in court when a lawyer tried to grandstand. The same stillness he learned as a teenager, getting pulled over 3 times in a single summer for fitting a description. He was familiar with this rhythm. Suspicion, accusation, escalation. A familiar dance. Let me retrieve my ID, he offered again. It's in my back pocket. You reach, and I'll take that as a threat, she snapped. We'll wait for backup. Her partner finally arrived, looking from Kevin to Monroe, then to the crowd now thickening around the perimeter. Mall shoppers paused outside coffee shops, some pretending not to stare, others filming openly. An elderly man muttered, unreal, as he leaned on his cane. Monroe's hand never left her holster. Kevin's phone buzzed in his pocket. He couldn't answer. He couldn't move. He was supposed to be at a judicial emergency conference, one where his vote would decide a crucial ruling on police oversight policies. His absence would stall the entire process. Irony wasn't lost on him. Monroe stepped closer again. You nervous? You should be. People who drive cars like this don't get nervous unless they've got something to hide. People get nervous when they're wrongly accused, Kevin said, his voice controlled. When their constitutional rights are ignored. She laughed without humor. Save the law school lectures. You got registration? Proof of purchase. Yes, in the glove box. And the title is in my briefcase on the passenger seat. Monroe gave a slight nod to her partner, who approached the car. Kevin's breath caught. That briefcase held confidential legal documents, sealed case notes, judiciary communications. Material that, if tampered with or exposed, could trigger mistrials, sanctions, and more. Do not open that briefcase, he said firmly. It contains privileged legal material. That right? Monroe asked. Seems like you've got an answer for everything. The crowd pressed in. Officer Patricia Monroe, still gripping the handle of her holstered weapon, now shifted her stance to face Kevin's passenger side door. Her partner, Officer Brian Knox, stood nearby, uneasily eyeing the crowd as it expanded to at least 40 onlookers. Phones hovered in every direction like mechanical fireflies. I'm going to search the vehicle, Monroe announced, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Her voice echoed slightly against the storefront windows of a nearby boutique, and the murmurs immediately thickened. That's not legal, someone shouted from the back. Get a warrant. Kevin's neck turned slightly, his face still composed but firm. Officer Monroe, he said, his voice carrying the courtroom weight honed over 15 years. You do not have my consent to search this vehicle. That briefcase contains confidential legal documents, attorney-client privilege, judicial memos. You cannot open it without violating federal law. Monroe gave a tight smile. A suspect with a lot of legal knowledge, huh? You know what else is a violation? Driving a stolen vehicle. Kevin closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, reminding himself that escalation would only feed the narrative already being written against him. This is a civil rights issue, he said, louder this time, not just for Monroe, but for the crowd. I invoke my Fourth Amendment rights under the United States Constitution. You may not search my vehicle without probable cause or a warrant issued by a judge. She scoffed, hand tightening. We have probable cause. You, in this car. That's enough. Kevin's jaw locked. That is not how the law works. Monroe turned to her radio. Unit 19 requesting backup. We have a non-compliant suspect refusing vehicle search. Crowd is growing hostile. Her use of the word hostile sent a ripple through the gathered spectators. Kevin could hear someone whispering. She's setting him up. She's framing the report already. A teenager holding his phone whispered into it. They're going to try something. Just wait. Officer Knox leaned slightly toward Monroe. You sure you want to push this? This is turning into something big. "You questioning me now, Brian?" Monroe replied under her breath. "This man's hiding something. No one stays that calm unless they've rehearsed it." At that moment, a woman pushed through the crowd. Middle-aged, short silver curls, pearls around her neck. She looked like someone's Sunday school teacher. "Officers, excuse me," she said with urgency. "I believe I recognize that man." "He's—" "Step back," Monroe snapped. "Ma'am, step back now, or I'll cite you for interfering with an active police investigation." "But you're making a mistake. Final warning." The woman hesitated, then looked at Kevin with pleading eyes before the crowd gently pulled her back into their collective orbit. The narrative Monroe had begun constructing was doing its job, and Kevin knew it. Suspect is non-compliant. Suspect is refusing lawful search. Crowd is growing hostile. Bystander attempted to interfere. Every word she spoke over that radio wasn't just a request for assistance. It was groundwork for a report, a paper shield to justify the overreach already unfolding. Kevin's phone buzzed again. He couldn't reach for it, but he saw the light in his peripheral vision. Another call from the Chief Justice. Each minute that passed was one step closer to the vote proceeding without him. One step closer to legislation about police accountability being decided without the voice of someone experiencing the very abuse the laws aim to prevent. The irony was dizzying. Monroe circled to the driver's side door and peered into the Mustang. Inside, Kevin's leather briefcase sat exactly where he'd left it, on the passenger seat, its Supreme Court seal partly obscured by paperwork. A boarding pass stuck out from one folder, and just underneath, a courthouse parking pass. Expired, yes, but still bearing his name and superior court credentials. Glinted beneath the windshield glare. Monroe's eyes narrowed. "What's in the briefcase?" "Documents," Kevin replied. Every syllable weighed with clarity. "Confidential legal records. You touch that briefcase, you open yourself to federal liability." She sneered. "Is that a threat?" "It's a legal reality." More sirens approached in the distance. Kevin heard the rising wail and recognized the timing. Backups were en route, and things were about to escalate. The blue and red lights would come next, then perimeter tape, and possibly, if Monroe continued to press her fabricated reality, handcuffs. The thought of being cuffed, publicly, falsely, and humiliatingly, made his chest tighten. He glanced toward the woman who tried to speak on his behalf. She was holding her phone now, too, but her hands trembled. She knew what she'd seen. She knew who he was. But like everyone else, she'd been silenced by authority, fear, and threat of arrest. The bystanders, though, were not silent. Kevin heard comments escalating. "He's calm, why is she pushing this? Just let the man get his ID. I swear if they try to hurt him." And above it all, live stream viewers flooded social media. Kevin didn't flinch. His hand still rested on the hood of his father's Mustang. Fingers spread, posture steady, spine straight. Control wasn't about what happened outside. It was about keeping the fire inside from consuming everything. The first car came to a stop, and from it stepped Sergeant Rachel Owens, a veteran with 2 decades of service etched across her stern features and tight posture. She adjusted her utility belt and scanned the scene with a tactical gaze, taking in the crowd, the suspect, the accusing officer, and the looming threat of viral outrage. "What do we have, Officer Monroe?" she asked, stepping up beside her subordinate without removing her aviators. Monroe's voice didn't skip a beat. "Possible grand theft auto. Suspect refusing to comply. Vehicle matches a reported stolen Mustang. Subject won't produce ID. He's also obstructing investigation by preventing search of the car." Kevin didn't speak. Not yet. He knew the game. Let them talk. Let them shape the story they want. Then he would turn the tide in a single move, like a well-timed ruling in a courtroom filled with bluffing attorneys. "Is that correct?" Owens asked, finally addressing Kevin directly. He turned his head just enough to make respectful eye contact. "Ma'am, I have repeatedly informed Officer Monroe that this vehicle belongs to me, that her claim of probable cause is unfounded, and that I do not consent to an unlawful search. I've invoked my Fourth Amendment rights." Monroe interjected before Owens could respond. "He's stalling. Anyone can claim constitutional rights. Doesn't make it true." Owens raised a hand. "Let him speak." Kevin's tone remained calm but assertive. There are confidential legal documents inside this car. Documents protected by both state and federal privilege. Any unauthorized search would violate civil and constitutional law. Owens studied him. Something about his voice, his wording, the measured authority behind his speech. It didn't line up with the usual traffic stop drama. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't defensive. He was deliberate, calculated. Monroe rolled her eyes. He's trying to play you. He's probably rehearsed all this. Criminals watch courtroom dramas too. Meanwhile, the 2nd Patrol Car's officer, a younger woman named Carla Navarez, began setting up crowd control, motioning the now 100-deep group to stay behind the marked cones. Her body cam blinked red, recording every moment. As more officers arrived, the crowd grew louder. From the perimeter came the sound of reporters setting up microphones and cameras. A news van with the logo Channel 7 Live pulled in, and a familiar voice called out, "We're here at Northgate Plaza, where what appears to be a racially charged stop has drawn a massive crowd." The commentary from social media surged across platforms. Kevin could hear phrases floating in the air. "He's too calm to be guilty." "Something doesn't add up." "This cop's about to lose her job." "Dude's a lawyer or something." Sergeant Owens turned toward Monroe. "Has he made any threats?" "No, but he's being uncooperative." "Has he resisted physically?" "No, but he's provoking the crowd." "Is he armed?" "Not that we know of." Owens frowned. "Then why haven't you asked for identification again?" Calmly. Monroe stiffened. "He refuses to provide it." Kevin spoke again. "I have not refused to identify myself. I've simply been denied the opportunity to safely retrieve my identification without being threatened." Owens raised an eyebrow. "Is that true?" Kevin nodded. "I informed Officer Monroe that I needed to reach for my briefcase. She threatened me with arrest if I moved." Owens looked at Monroe, who replied defensively, "We can't let suspects reach for unknown objects in a vehicle. That's protocol." "It's also common sense to use judgment," Owens said. She stepped forward. "Sir, if you're willing, and if you retrieve it slowly, would you be able to show us some form of identification?" Kevin didn't move. "I would, Sergeant, but I want it on record that I am doing so voluntarily after invoking my constitutional rights, and that the documents in that briefcase are judicial property. If anyone opens that case without a warrant, they will be in violation of the law." Owens nodded slowly, but before she could authorize the move, Monroe stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. He's obviously playing us. He's stalling for the cameras. Look at him. This is a show." "And you're making it worse," Owens snapped, for the first time raising her voice. "Step back, Monroe. Let me handle this." Monroe fumed, but obeyed. The crowd erupted in hushed applause, the kind of restrained relief that came when someone finally stood up to unchecked authority. A news camera zoomed in on Kevin's face. The anchor began narrating. "We don't know who this man is yet, but his demeanor and language suggest he may be more than what this officer suspects. Stay tuned." Kevin was aware of every camera, every angle, every person watching. He wasn't afraid of the attention. He was simply waiting for the right moment. Sergeant Owens leaned in slightly. "Sir, can you state your name for the record?" Kevin glanced at Monroe, then back at Owens. "My name is Kevin Wallace," he said clearly, "and that vehicle belonged to my father, Judge Harold Wallace, who served this district for 32 years. I inherited it 18 months ago, and I have the registration in that briefcase, along with my judicial ID." A pause descended like snowfall. Sergeant Owens blinked. Monroe's expression froze, lips parted. Kevin didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just waited. Owens exhaled. "Judge Wallace." "Superior Court, Criminal Division." Sergeant Owens narrowed her eyes, recalibrating her assessment of the situation now that the man she'd questioned turned out to be a sitting Superior Court judge. Navarez whispered urgently into her radio, requesting higher supervision as the situation teetered on the edge of a national scandal. From within the murmuring crowd, an elderly woman pushed forward slowly, her small frame determined despite the tightly packed bodies surrounding her. Her gray hair curled tightly beneath a faded navy sun hat, and her eyes, sharp and knowing, scanned Kevin's face with growing certainty. Her name was Judith Carter, and she had served as an administrative clerk in the county courthouse for over 40 years. She had typed verdicts, archived legal transcripts, and walked the halls of justice alongside Kevin's father, Judge Harold Wallace. Now retired, she rarely left her small apartment, but that morning she had come to the plaza to pick up her blood pressure medication. Fate or justice had other plans. "Excuse me," she said, her voice frail but firm. "Excuse me, please let me through." No one stopped her. The crowd sensed that something important was happening. Kevin turned toward her slowly as she stepped into the clearing between him and the gathering line of officers. Her eyes met his, and recognition bloomed across her face. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "You're Kevin, Judge Wallace's boy. You're Judge Kevin Wallace." Kevin gave her the smallest nod. "Yes, ma'am, that's me." Monroe's voice cracked through the tension like brittle glass. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. You're interfering with a criminal investigation." Judith didn't flinch. Her voice took on a new firmness, one born from decades of courtroom procedure and legal protocol. "Officer, I worked in that courthouse since before you were born. I saw this young man sit on his father's lap while Judge Harold Wallace ruled over civil rights cases that shaped this state's laws. I watched him graduate law school. I filed the paperwork when he was appointed to the bench." She turned toward Sergeant Owens. "That man is a superior court judge. If you don't recognize him, that's on you, not on him." The crowd gasped audibly now. Cell phones shot upward like salutes. Monroe looked to Owens for backup, but Owens was too busy processing the implications. Kevin remained still, his calm presence standing in direct contrast to the emotional storm brewing in Monroe's chest. "This can't be," Monroe muttered, her voice barely audible. "This doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," Kevin replied, his voice strong now, purposeful. "You looked at me. You looked at my skin. You looked at my car. And you made assumptions. You ignored protocol. You escalated without cause. You refused to allow me to identify myself when I attempted to. You drew conclusions instead of evidence." Owens glanced toward the crowd, now several hundred strong. Reporters were live on the scene, microphones pointed, mouths moving, stories already spinning into the nation's living rooms. The live streams were broadcasting to thousands, maybe millions, and the hashtag Judge Wallace was trending. Monroe's face turned red with frustration, her previous authority slipping through her fingers like sand in a storm. "You're twisting this around," she said. "I was following procedure." "No, you weren't," Kevin said simply. "You were following prejudice." Navarez took a step toward Owens. "Sarge, we have over 50,000 live viewers on TikTok alone. The stories already hit national news. Twitter's exploded. Even the mayor's office is pinging dispatch." Owens exhaled slowly. The line between policy and disaster was razor thin now. "Officer Monroe," she said slowly, "step back. We are going to reassess the situation. Judge Wallace, would you be willing to produce your ID now?" Kevin nodded once. "Yes, as long as it is recorded clearly that I am doing so voluntarily and that I previously attempted to do so and was threatened with arrest." "Understood," Owens replied. Kevin slowly moved to the back of the Mustang, every gesture deliberate and visible. He reached into the seat, retrieving his leather briefcase embossed with the state seal. The crowd held its breath. Kevin unclasped it, flipped it open, and extracted the glossy, laminated ID card. His official identification as a judge in the Superior Court Criminal Division. He held it up high, turning slowly so every angle could see it. The camera flashes ignited like lightning. Judith Carter stepped forward again, her voice rich with emotion now. "I told you all," she said to no one and everyone. "That's the judge. That's our judge." The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in vindicated applause. Some clapped, some wept, others simply held their phones higher. Kevin stood silently as the wave of recognition spread through the plaza like wildfire. The moment had arrived. The tide had turned. Officer Monroe stood motionless, her pride crushed under the weight of reality. She had not just profiled a black man in a classic car. She had profiled the judge whose courtroom handled cases of racial bias and civil rights enforcement. She had, without knowing, tried to humiliate the very man who held authority over how justice was delivered in this county. Owens lowered her head for a brief second before looking Monroe in the eye. "We've got a problem," she muttered. Kevin wasn't interested in vengeance, but justice demanded acknowledgement. She looked to Sergeant Owens, but Owens gave no order, said nothing, only observed, her internal conflict plain as her brows knit together in discomfort. Monroe's voice rang out, tense and defensive. "This doesn't change the fact that you refused to comply with orders during a lawful stop," she declared, stepping forward again. "I'm placing you under arrest for obstruction." The crowd gasped as one. Kevin, standing beside his father's Mustang with his portfolio still open in his hands, slowly closed it, watching Monroe with the cool detachment of a man who had heard excuses like this before, both in court and on the street. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. "You are seriously making this worse," Sergeant Owens muttered under her breath, but still made no move to intervene. Kevin looked at Monroe directly and asked calmly, "Obstruction of what, officer?" His voice didn't waver, didn't rise, but cut through the murmuring crowd like a clean stroke. "I identified myself. I remained compliant. I informed you of my rights. At no point did I resist or attempt to flee. What exactly am I obstructing? Your ego." Monroe's face turned crimson as she reached for her handcuffs again, but before she could even fully remove them from her belt, the crowd shouted in protest. "You can't arrest him," someone yelled. "He's a judge," another added. "This is police harassment," a third voice roared. Dozens of phones pointed in Monroe's direction now, capturing every twitch of her fingers, every flicker of frustration in her eyes. Monroe waved them off and took another step toward Kevin. "Judge or not, you're not above the law," she barked, a statement meant to reassert control, but which only served to further infuriate the spectators who knew exactly what was being done here. Sergeant Owens finally spoke. "Patricia," she said firmly, "stand down. We need to regroup." But Monroe ignored her, her sights locked on Kevin, as if his very presence was a threat to her authority. Kevin stood tall. "You're absolutely right, Officer Monroe," he said. "I'm not above the law, but I am protected by it, just like every citizen standing here watching you abuse your power." The tension was boiling now. The live streams were surging past 75,000 viewers. News reporters pushed closer. The shopping plaza security team stood nervously at the perimeter, unsure of whether to assist or withdraw. Monroe's breathing quickened. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," she ordered. "Now." Kevin didn't move. "Are you truly ready to put handcuffs on a sitting judge with his ID in his hand, in front of over 100 witnesses and tens of thousands watching live, with no legal justification?" he asked. "Because if so, then by all means do it. But you better be certain." Sergeant Owens's hand hovered near her own radio, her voice low but heavy with urgency. "This is escalating into a civil rights violation, Patricia," she warned. "He hasn't resisted. He's complied. He identified himself. This is a bad move." But Monroe either didn't hear or didn't care. "This vehicle is still under suspicion of being stolen," she said, grasping at the one thread she still had left. Kevin replied without missing a beat, "Then run the plates. The registration is in my name, transferred from my late father's estate. I already told you that, and the documentation is in this folder." He gestured toward his briefcase. "You've refused to look at it because you decided who I was the moment you saw me." The crowd shouted in agreement. "Check the papers. Let him show you. You're digging your own grave, officer." Monroe's eyes darted from face to face, each one filled with anger, disbelief, and judgment. She was losing control, and the realization made her desperate. But before she could act further, a new voice cut across the parking lot, amplified by a megaphone. "This is Chief Inspector Helena Rowe with Internal Affairs. All officers are ordered to cease interaction and disengage immediately. I am assuming control of this scene." The crowd fell into a stunned silence as a black unmarked sedan pulled to the edge of the lot and Rowe stepped out. Her presence was commanding, her uniform crisp, her hair tied back, her expression unreadable behind aviator sunglasses. Owens sighed in relief. Monroe stiffened. Rowe approached, flanked by 2 IA officers, her gaze flicking from Monroe to Kevin, and then to the gathering of cameras. "Judge Wallace," she said, extending her hand, "we apologize for the situation you've been subjected to. You will be given a full opportunity to make a formal statement. Until then, you are free to go about your business." Kevin shook her hand firmly. "Thank you, Chief Rowe," he said, "but I'm not leaving. This situation demands transparency, not retreat." Rowe nodded once. "Understood." She turned to Monroe. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending investigation. Hand over your badge and weapon." Monroe's face collapsed. "You can't be serious," she whispered. Rowe didn't blink. "Do it. Now." With trembling hands, Monroe removed her badge, her radio, and her firearm, placing them into Rowe's waiting hands. Dressed in a long beige cardigan and holding a leather-bound planner close to her chest, the elderly woman's presence cut through the tension like a bell in a cathedral. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice surprisingly clear and firm for someone so slight. "I need to speak." A few people turned, curious. Kevin looked up, recognition dawning in his expression before he could speak. "I know that man," the woman announced, stepping forward into the circle now formed around Kevin and the officers. "That man is Judge Kevin Wallace of the Superior Court." Murmurs swept through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. "Judge," someone asked. "Are you sure?" another voice said. But the woman was already reaching into her purse, retrieving a worn ID card with a courthouse seal and a faded photograph. "My name is Lillian Reyes. I served as court clerk for over 30 years. I retired 2 years ago. I've seen this man preside over dozens of cases. I've filed his paperwork. I've watched him serve this county with distinction and integrity. And I'll be damned if I stand here one more second and let anyone pretend he isn't who he says he is." Her voice rose with conviction, slicing through any lingering doubt. Kevin stepped forward and gently placed his hand over hers. "Ms. Reyes," he said, his voice soft with gratitude, "you always did have perfect timing." A wave of applause erupted from a crowd. Phones captured every angle as her statement reverberated beyond the parking lot, quickly hitting live feeds and comment sections already saturated with calls for justice. Chief Inspector Rowe nodded to her assistants. "Get confirmation from courthouse records, but it seems unnecessary now," she said. "Thank you, Ms. Reyes. You've just accelerated our investigation." Monroe, still standing to the side in stunned silence, looked as if she had been hollowed out. Her badge was gone. Her weapon was surrendered. Her authority, once an extension of her uniform and presence, had collapsed completely under the truth of Kevin's identity and the weight of her own prejudice. Kevin, still holding his briefcase, now turned toward the assembled media. Journalists from at least 4 local stations had arrived by then, pushing microphones and cameras closer as the story unfolded live before thousands of online viewers. "Let me be clear," Kevin began, his voice calm and deliberate. "What happened here today is not about a misunderstanding. It is about assumptions rooted in bias. It is about how authority, when unchecked, turns into oppression. And it is about how the truth, when supported by courage and community, can rise to correct it." Ms. Reyes stood behind him now, her presence adding gravitas to his words, a living piece of the institution that Monroe had tried to deny. Chief Inspector Rowe folded her arms and addressed the press as well. "We are conducting a full internal investigation," she said. "Officer Monroe's conduct will be reviewed for possible civil rights violations. Judge Wallace's rights were unquestionably violated here. We will act accordingly." The reporters scribbled furiously or typed into tablets. Amara Chun, a student journalist from the City University who had been live streaming the incident from the beginning, spoke loudly enough for her viewers to hear. "Y'all, this just got real. Confirmation from courthouse staff. IA is on the scene." The crowd here just flipped from rage to reverence. As if to prove her point, the mood had indeed changed. The crowd, once a boiling pot of indignation, now stood still reverent. People didn't just see Kevin anymore as a victim or as a black man wrongfully accused. They saw the judge, the professional, the authority figure who had handled a public violation of his rights with composure, clarity, and confidence. Children clung to their parents, witnessing a lesson in justice unfold before their eyes. Monroe, meanwhile, seemed to shrink in place, no longer the towering figure barking orders, but a person stripped of uniform and power, forced to watch the institution she had misrepresented affirm its own integrity through Kevin. Kevin turned back to the car, his Mustang, the legacy of his late father, untouched and still gleaming in the afternoon sun. The vehicle, once the supposed object of theft, had now become a symbol not of suspicion, but of inheritance, identity, and pride reclaimed. "This car belonged to my father," Kevin said, lifting the folder again. "It was transferred to me through his estate. I have the registration here. I offered to show it from the start." Chief Rowe gestured. "Please do, Judge." Kevin opened the briefcase and revealed the documents once more, handing them over to one of the IA officers, who examined them briefly and nodded. "Confirmed. Clean title transfer. All checks out," he said. Rowe stepped forward. "Thank you, Judge Wallace. You've shown tremendous restraint and poise throughout this ordeal. We'll be contacting the presiding judicial board and filing a formal apology through the channels. Is there anything further you wish to request at this time?" Kevin looked out across the crowd, meeting faces still staring at him with awe, some embarrassed at their silence earlier, others empowered by his grace. "Only this," he said. "Let this not be remembered as the day a judge was profiled, but as the day we all witnessed how the truth reclaimed space when courage meets injustice. Let this become the example that leads to training, to accountability, and to equity." He'd presided over enough cases to understand that truth didn't always translate to justice, and recognition didn't guarantee accountability. As he watched the IA officers continue their quiet discussion with Chief Rowe, he felt a subtle buzz in his blazer pocket. His phone, still overflowing with missed calls, now displayed yet another. Chief Justice Nathaniel Boone. His thumb hovered over the screen, but he hesitated. It wasn't time. Not yet. Officer Monroe had been temporarily relieved of duty, but she hadn't left the scene. Standing off to the side near the second cruiser, she was speaking into her shoulder radio with rapid, low-toned urgency, her jaw clenched as if she were swallowing her own pride. Kevin watched her, and though her voice didn't carry, the posture was unmistakable. She was calling for more backup, and he knew why. She was hoping for reinforcements to reset the power dynamic, to overwhelm the narrative, to wrest back control from a truth that had cornered her. It was a tactic he'd seen before in court, in hearings, even in quiet committee meetings behind closed doors. Monroe wasn't conceding, she was regrouping, and Kevin refused to let that go unchallenged. "Chief Rowe," he called out clearly, drawing the attention of those nearby, including a few reporters still filming. "I'd like it noted formally that Officer Monroe is continuing to assert procedural authority despite being relieved of command and in the presence of internal affairs. This could constitute obstruction and further violation of my civil rights." Rowe turned her head, eyes narrowing as she observed Monroe still muttering into her mic. "Officer Monroe," Rowe said sharply, "stand down. That's a direct order." Monroe paused, gave a slow nod, but her hand still hovered near the radio. Too slow, too deliberate. The cameras caught it, and social media noticed. At that very moment, Amarichen's livestream comment section exploded with reactions. "She's still calling for backup," one viewer typed. "Y'all, she's trying to spin this." "Keep recording," said another. The viewer count climbed rapidly, tens of thousands turning into hundreds of thousands. Kevin's name was now trending nationwide. News networks interrupted regularly scheduled programs. Banners crawled across screens. Black judge accused of stealing own car. Live fallout unfolding. Every misstep Monroe made was being captured, dissected, and shared. But Kevin wasn't seeking revenge. He was anchoring the moment in due process, ensuring that no one officer or bystander forgot the legal structure holding this system together. "As a sitting judge," he continued, raising his voice just slightly so the nearby mics could pick it up. "I am invoking my Fourth Amendment rights. Any attempt to search my vehicle or belongings without a warrant or probable cause will be documented as a violation of constitutional protections." Rowe turned toward him, her expression unreadable but clearly aware of the optics. She nodded. "Understood, Judge Wallace. No search will proceed without appropriate legal authorization." Monroe flinched visibly, and that small movement sent another ripple through the live stream comments, now surpassing 300,000 live viewers. Among them were lawyers, civil rights activists, and law students quoting precedent in real time. It wasn't just a video anymore, it was evidence. Kevin reached into his pocket, slowly and clearly, then produced a small digital recorder. "This device," he said aloud, "has been recording since the moment Officer Monroe made first contact. As is permitted under California Penal Code Section 148G, I've documented this encounter for use in any potential legal proceeding." One of the news microphones caught every word. Monroe's eyes went wide. She knew that recording wouldn't just capture her voice or tone, it would memorialize every assumption, every refusal to listen, every violation of policy. But it wasn't about punishment for Kevin. It was about change, accountability without vengeance, education without humiliation. Chief Rowe gestured to one of her team to approach Kevin. "We're going to need a copy of that recording, Judge, for our IA report," she said. "Of course," Kevin replied, offering a polite nod. "You'll have it before the end of the day." At that moment, the familiar wail of sirens cut through the murmurs. 2 more squad cars turned into the lot, lights flashing. The kind of response Kevin had feared would be Monroe's final card. Uniformed officers stepped out, clearly tense, hands near weapons. But they froze when they saw the crowd, now well over 200 people, and the dozen cameras pointed directly at them. One of them, a younger officer, mid-20s, with a hesitant gait, looked toward Rowe for guidance. "Stand down," she ordered immediately. "This scene is under control. No escalation, no contact." The new arrivals paused, then slowly backed away, waiting near their vehicles instead of approaching. Kevin exhaled slowly. Crisis averted. But the battle for the truth wasn't over. Amara's voice, now carried clearly through a handheld mic, addressed her live stream audience. "We just passed 500,000 viewers," she said. "This is the largest audience I've ever seen on a personal stream. This is what transparency looks like. This is why documenting matters." Her words were amplified by hashtags and reshares that made Kevin's name a headline across every major platform. Still, in the middle of it all, Kevin's heart beat steady. Not with fear, not with rage, but with clarity. He understood now that this moment was not just personal. It was generational. It was systemic. Inside it, nestled on the passenger seat just behind the glass, rested the single object that could silence the noise and transform suspicion into validation. Chief Rowe, still mindful of procedure and optics, gestured to Officer Lena McClure, who had remained respectfully quiet but observant throughout the confrontation. "Officer McClure," Rowe said with measured authority, "please retrieve the leather portfolio from the passenger seat, carefully and without disturbing its contents." The officer nodded, approached the vehicle slowly, ensuring every move was visible and non-threatening, then gently opened the door. With latex-gloved hands, she lifted the sleek leather case and brought it to Kevin, who accepted it calmly, aware of how much now hinged on what lay within. The crowd hushed again, a reverent silence, broken only by the distant clicking of media cameras and the occasional beep from a phone notification. Kevin opened the portfolio with a slow, deliberate motion, revealing an organized set of legal documents, neatly tabbed and color-coded, as any meticulous judge would keep them. He removed a single card first, laminated and bordered with gold, bearing the seal of the Superior Court of California. He held it aloft, ensuring every camera captured it, then passed it to Chief Rowe, who accepted it solemnly and examined it closely. "Superior Court of California," she read aloud for the crowd and officers to hear. "Judge Kevin Wallace, Criminal Division." Her voice carried through the parking lot like a verdict, final and unquestionable. The wave of reaction that followed was instant and profound. A collective gasp surged through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief and dawning awareness. Monroe, still standing to the side with clenched fists and a tightening jaw, stared at the ID as if it had physically struck her. Her eyes darted to the Mustang, to the portfolio, to Kevin himself, and for the first time since the beginning of the encounter, she had no words. Her voice, so firm and accusatory earlier, had withered into silence. Kevin continued calmly, retrieving the car's registration documents from the folder. "This," he said, holding the paper forward, "is the vehicle's registration, transferred from the estate of Judge Robert Wallace, my father, to me, dated 16 months ago. You'll find the VIN and license plate match." Officer McClure examined it carefully, compared the numbers to the Mustang's plates, then nodded toward Chief Rowe. "It checks out," she said. "Everything matches." Kevin then produced a boarding pass from a recent judicial conference in Washington, D.C., the same one he had just returned from. "This," he explained, "was the reason I couldn't answer the Chief Justice's earlier calls. I was in session, and I was supposed to vote today on statewide police accountability measures. But I was delayed by this." He spread the contents of the briefcase wide for transparency, exposing legal briefs on civil rights cases, court rulings on racial profiling, and sealed documentation pertaining to ACTA cases. A hush fell again, more potent this time, a silence born not of anticipation but realization. The reality settled in. Monroe had not just profiled a man, she had profiled a judge, one deeply entrenched in the very reform measures her department was failing to uphold. "This," Kevin said with unwavering conviction, "is what I carry to a courthouse every day. These are the documents I prepare to ensure due process, civil liberties, and equal protection under the law. And yet, none of it stopped me from being seen as a suspect first." Monroe shifted uneasily, but still said nothing. Her silence had become an admission, echoing louder than any rebuttal could. Mrs. Reyes, standing with a straightened spine now, looked toward her son, Commissioner Hayes, who had just arrived moments before, flanked by two high-ranking city officials. Her voice, crackling with age but clear with conviction, rang out. "I told you who he was. You didn't listen. None of you did." Kevin nodded respectfully toward her. "Thank you, Mrs. Reyes. Your voice was the first to speak truth today." The commissioner stepped forward, took the ID from Chief Rowe, and studied it for himself. His face, though practiced at stoicism, betrayed the complex mixture of shame, concern, and fury boiling just beneath the surface. "Judge Wallace," he began, "on behalf of the department, I offer my sincere—" Kevin raised a hand, silencing him with the grace of a seasoned jurist. "I will accept no apologies," he said, "until corrective action is not only promised but implemented. Too often, we hear regret without resolution." The commissioner nodded grimly, understanding the weight behind the words. Monroe finally spoke, her voice small but audible. I didn't know." "That," Kevin replied, "is precisely the problem." The livestream comment section erupted in unified reaction. Phrases like "this is what systemic bias looks like," and "she's speechless now, too late," flooding Amara's screen, which now surpassed 950,000 concurrent viewers. Kevin gathered his documents and returned them to the portfolio, which he held like a shield forged from credentials and credibility, protection he shouldn't have needed in the first place. The irony that a black judge needed to be overprepared, overly documented, and publicly confirmed to be believed wasn't lost on anyone watching, least of all Kevin himself. He turned slowly to the crowd, scanning the many faces, some angry, some tearful, others simply stunned. "Let this," he said, voice carrying across the lot, "be more than just a viral moment. Let it be a mirror. What happened here today is not rare. It's not unique. It's merely visible. That visibility is the only thing that makes it different. And if we are to build a justice system that reflects justice, then it begins with acknowledgement, followed by action." The reporters closed in again, mics raised, questions tumbling over each other. "Judge Wallace, how do you feel? Will you press charges? What will you recommend to the Chief Justice?" Kevin paused, his voice measured. "I will speak with the Chief Justice shortly. What happens next is not just about me. It's about us all. But rest assured, there will be accountability. This is not over. He stepped back toward the Mustang, placed the briefcase gently in the passenger seat, and stood with his hand resting lightly on the hood. The same car that started this confrontation now stood as a monument to its resolution. The ID had been displayed, the registration had been verified, and the story was now traveling at the speed of digital wildfire. What had begun as a tense accusation had transformed into a national event. Live stream numbers passed 1.2 million, news outlets scrambled to reposition their camera crews, and social media hashtags exploded. Hashtag Justice for Kevin, hashtag Black Judges Matter, and hashtag Bias Exposed filled trending charts across platforms. The mall parking lot, once a place of ordinary weekend consumerism, had turned into an arena for social justice and accountability. Kevin stepped away from the car, his steps deliberate, not rushed, not angry, controlled. The crowd instinctively made space, not out of fear, but out of respect. Chief Rowe approached cautiously, flanked by Commissioner Hayes, whose arrival had already added another layer of gravity to the situation. Hayes was a man seasoned in law enforcement politics, but the expression on his face betrayed that even he knew this was different. Kevin faced them both squarely. "What you witnessed here today," he began, his voice calm but resonant, "is not simply a personal insult. This wasn't just about a judge or a car. This was about a system built on assumptions, empowered by unchecked authority, and perpetuated by silence." Reporters leaned in. Microphones, phones, and cameras pointed at him like spotlights in a courtroom. Kevin continued. "Everyday ordinary citizens, men and women without judicial credentials, without public roles, without audiences, are subjected to this same treatment. The only reason this ended differently is because of a camera and a title. That's not justice. That's lottery." Applause broke from a section of the crowd, soft at first, then growing. Commissioner Hayes nodded respectfully, but said nothing yet. He was a man calculating the consequences of every second. Chief Rowe shifted slightly, but kept her eyes fixed on Kevin. Then Kevin turned to Monroe, who stood stiffly, her badge now feeling heavier than ever. Her face was pale, lips tight, and hands clenched. Kevin addressed her directly, without malice, but without flinching. "Officer Monroe," he said, "you drew conclusions based on my appearance, not my actions. You ignored protocol, dismissed witness testimony, and escalated without cause. If I had moved too fast, spoken too loudly, or simply refused to comply, this could have ended in tragedy. That's a reality I live with. That's a reality too many people of color endure every single day." Monroe didn't respond. Her eyes were glossy, but no tears fell. Kevin wasn't looking for sympathy. He was looking for acknowledgement. Commissioner Hayes stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Judge Wallace, I want to be very clear. What happened here today is unacceptable. I have already spoken to Internal Affairs, and Officer Monroe is being placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation. Body cam footage, live stream content, and eyewitness testimony will be reviewed in detail." The crowd responded with a mixture of satisfaction and still simmering frustration. One voice shouted, "It's about time." Another added, "This better not get swept under the rug." Kevin raised his hand, and silence returned. "Accountability," he said, "isn't punishment. It's the first step toward restoring trust. But it has to be consistent, transparent, and fair. My status should not have made this case special. The system should protect all of us equally." Reporters shouted questions. "Judge Wallace, do you plan to file charges? Will Officer Monroe be prosecuted? What changes do you want to see in police training?" Kevin didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked to Amara, the young woman who had recorded the incident, now surrounded by other influencers, activists, and journalists. He walked toward her. "What you did today," he said, "was journalism in its purest form. You didn't just film for clicks. You documented a civil rights violation in real time. That matters. You mattered. And I want you to keep that video safe. You have evidence that could shape policies, training, and maybe even legislation." Amara, visibly emotional, nodded and clutched her phone like a priceless artifact. The crowd began to chant her name softly, then louder. Amara. Amara. Kevin turned back toward the press. We live in a time where every incident like this chips away at community trust. It can't be restored with apologies alone. There must be review boards with teeth, bias training that isn't performative, and officers held to the same standards we expect from every citizen. Commissioner Hayes took the cue. Effective immediately, he said, projecting his voice, we are launching a full audit of departmental training materials, stop and search procedures, and internal bias reporting systems. The video evidence from today's incident will be used in future training scenarios statewide. And I will personally invite Judge Wallace to join our advisory board on community relations and police reform. Kevin gave a slow nod, signaling that it was a beginning, not an end. Meanwhile, Officer McClure gently guided Monroe away from the crowd and into a patrol vehicle, not in cuffs, but under the clear implication that consequences were finally in motion. The act was symbolic but necessary. As she disappeared from view, the crowd didn't cheer her removal. They just watched, some satisfied, others skeptical, most hoping this wouldn't be just another headline without follow-through. Kevin noticed a young boy in the crowd, maybe 10 or 11, holding his father's hand tightly. The boy's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with wonder. Kevin approached them. "What's your name?" he asked. "Isaiah," the boy replied. Kevin knelt down slightly to meet him at eye level. "Isaiah, today wasn't just about me. It was about making sure that when you grow up, you don't have to explain why your skin color makes some people treat you differently. Do you understand?" Isaiah nodded slowly. Kevin placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then we've already started to win." The crowd responded with another round of applause, this time warmer, filled with hope. Reporters tried again. "Will you testify before Congress? What federal changes are needed to prevent this nationally? Have you spoken to the Chief Justice yet?" Kevin raised a hand again. "There will be a press conference, but not today. Today belongs to the truth and to everyone who stood up for it." Cameras continued to flash. Live streams continued to surge. But Kevin, having said what needed to be said, returned to the Mustang, opened the door, and sat inside. The leather interior smelled like memory, of his father's hands on the wheel, of family drives, of legacy. He didn't start the engine just yet. He watched as the crowd slowly dispersed, conversations buzzing, people exchanging information, forming committees, organizing forums. Change had begun, not in legislation, not yet in law books, but in the minds of everyday people who had seen injustice and weren't willing to forget it. The heat from the Mustang's engine had cooled, but the fire ignited in the city burned brighter than ever. Judge Kevin Wallace didn't drive away that afternoon. Instead, he remained in the parking lot long after the crowd dispersed, speaking in hushed tones with community leaders, law professors, civil rights attorneys, and journalists who all now saw him not only as a judge, but as a catalyst. The media vans had set up a semi-permanent camp around the mall entrance, and the shopping center had become the epicenter of a national discussion that showed no signs of fading. By nightfall, over 3 million people had watched the incident across platforms. Public pressure mounted at an unprecedented rate, with citizens calling their local representatives, demanding accountability, and organizing town hall meetings. That Monday morning, City Hall buzzed with urgency. The mayor, previously cautious and non-committal on police reform issues, called an emergency session with the city council. Her aides scrambled to prepare a statement that could satisfy both the press and the people. Meanwhile, the Chief Justice of the state had contacted Kevin directly, asking for a private debrief and urging him to consider joining the governor's newly proposed Police and Civil Rights Advisory Committee. Kevin agreed, not for the recognition, but because he understood that the momentum generated must translate into action. At the courthouse, where he normally presided with a quiet authority, Judge Wallace was met with a standing ovation from staff and clerks. Some hugged him, others simply nodded, their eyes glassy with shared understanding. Behind closed doors, district judges discussed how Kevin's experience underscored the silent tensions many of them had endured but never spoken aloud. During a closed session, the city's police union leadership met with Commissioner Hayes. The atmosphere was tense. Some officers believed Monroe had simply followed instinct, protocol even, while others acknowledged that what had happened was a textbook case of bias and escalation. Commissioner Hayes didn't mince words. He laid out the public pressure, the legal exposure, the national spotlight. "We either lead this reform," he said bluntly, "or we'll be forced into it with no say at all." That same day, Officer Patricia Monroe received official notice of her suspension pending a full internal affairs investigation. She was instructed to surrender her badge, service weapon, and credentials. The news was met with mixed reactions from within the department. Some whispered about betrayal, others about long overdue change. Monroe, meanwhile, remained silent, declining interviews and staying away from public view. Legal experts began dissecting the footage from every angle. Television analysts debated probable cause, constitutional violations, Fourth Amendment rights, and the psychological patterns behind profiling. Kevin, however, chose not to appear on the nightly talk shows. Instead, he began drafting an open letter to the city, which he published in multiple local and national newspapers. "We must recognize that law and order is not synonymous with suspicion and control," the letter read. "Justice cannot be practiced in the courtroom while being denied on the streets. Reform is not a betrayal of law enforcement. It is the fulfillment of its promise." Within hours of publication, the letter became a rallying point. Students printed it on posters. Professors assigned it in classes. Community groups read it aloud at vigils and public forums. The mayor, sensing a shift in public sentiment too large to ignore, invited Kevin to co-chair a new committee tasked with reforming police training and community engagement strategies. He accepted, with one condition, that the committee include victims of profiling, mental health professionals, civil rights attorneys, and rank-and-file officers who were ready to admit the system's flaws and help fix them. His condition was met without debate. Meanwhile, Amara Johnson, whose live stream had ignited this nationwide reckoning, found herself fielding interview requests from every major network. She chose her appearances carefully, using her growing platform to emphasize that this wasn't just about one judge, one officer, or one city. "What happened to Judge Wallace happens to people who don't have a title or a camera," she repeated. "This has to mean something bigger." The city attorney's office began reviewing complaints previously dismissed due to lack of evidence or procedural compliance. Kevin's confrontation had exposed just how easily language could distort reality, how non-compliant could be applied to someone following every instruction simply because of how they looked. Local high school civics classes studied the case, comparing it to historical examples of civil rights violations. Churches held town halls where clergy and police spoke side by side. Barbershops and coffee houses became spaces of strategy, not just talk. Reform proposals began to take shape: mandatory body cams on all stops, quarterly de-escalation training, public access to traffic stop demographics by officer, expanded civilian review boards with subpoena power, and community liaisons embedded in precincts. Kevin read every draft, suggested changes, pushed for stronger language. "Vagueness is the enemy of accountability," he told the mayor. At the same time, he returned to his courtroom, because justice delayed was still justice denied. But now his courtroom was fuller than ever: observers, interns, young law students seeking inspiration from someone who had transformed a moment of humiliation into a movement. In the evenings, Kevin worked with lawyers from civil rights organizations to draft model legislation that could be adopted at the state level. They aimed to create a blueprint other jurisdictions could follow, making systemic change scalable. At home, he kept his father's Mustang under a cover, driving it only on Saturdays. The car had gone from a symbol of legacy to a national icon, but to Kevin, it was still his father's car. And that mattered most. One night, after a particularly long committee session, Kevin sat alone in his study, reviewing notes. On his desk was a letter from a young boy named Isaiah, the child he'd spoken to in the crowd. The letter read, "Thank you for making the world safer for someone like me. I want to be a judge like you one day." Kevin folded the letter gently and placed it next to his father's photo. The system had responded, but the work was only beginning. As co-chair of the newly formed Police Reform and Community Oversight Committee, Kevin was no longer merely interpreting laws. He was shaping policy, drafting mandates, and most importantly, forcing a deeply embedded system to look inward. Around him sat an unusually diverse group of citizens, each handpicked for their expertise and perspective. Faith leaders, formerly incarcerated activists, mental health counselors, legal scholars, young students like Amara Johnson, and even a few police officers with a genuine desire to bridge the widening gap between the community and those sworn to protect it. Kevin opened the first meeting with a tone that was firm but inclusive. He reminded everyone that reform without accountability was performance, that trust was not a PR campaign, and that justice required more than legislation. It needed transformation. The early days of the committee's work were filled with conflict, discomfort, and painful truths, but Kevin welcomed it. He believed that the friction meant they were finally sanding down decades of negligence and indifference. During their third session, a debate flared between Officer Darius Lewis, a patrol veteran, and civil rights attorney Helena Mendez. Darius argued that officers had to make split-second decisions and couldn't be burdened with political correctness during high-stress situations. Helena countered that the legal system didn't excuse poor judgment based on stress when it came to civilians. Why should officers be different? Kevin didn't interrupt the exchange. He let it play out, knowing that productive tension was often the birthplace of consensus. When he finally spoke, it was not to lecture, but to anchor. "We're not here to debate if the system is broken," he said calmly. "We're here because it is, and we've all seen it. The question is, what are we going to build in its place?" His influence outside the committee also grew. Universities invited him to speak about ethical jurisprudence. Think tanks requested his analysis on reform frameworks, and media outlets tried relentlessly to book interviews he consistently declined. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in function. Even as his reputation swelled, Kevin remained focused on the legislative pipeline. He pushed for data transparency laws that required police departments to publicly report stop and search statistics, broken down by race, age, and location. He collaborated with data scientists to build an open access dashboard where any citizen could track enforcement patterns in real time. He called this initiative the Sunlight Project and insisted it be funded not as a pilot, but as a permanent civic tool. During a closed-door meeting with the mayor and city budget officials, Kevin argued for reallocating a portion of the law enforcement budget to fund community crisis teams trained in de-escalation, mental health response, and non-lethal interventions. He presented research, case studies, and even a fiscal model showing long-term savings from reduced litigation and settlements. The mayor hesitated at first, worried about backlash from police unions and conservative constituents, but Kevin leaned in and made it plain. "You saw what happened in that parking lot. Multiply that by 100 cases we never filmed. Now ask yourself, what costs more, rethinking public safety or paying for the consequences of failing to?" The mayor eventually agreed, and the council approved a $2.8 million budget shift. Kevin's leadership extended beyond policy. He also took time to meet with patrol officers in small, informal sessions where no press was allowed. He listened to their frustrations, acknowledged their risks, but challenged their assumptions. One afternoon, during a precinct visit, an officer asked why he always sided against the police in misconduct cases. Kevin didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I don't side against police. I side against injustice. If you wear that badge with honor, then you should too." Slowly, perceptions began to shift. Inside police academies, Kevin's incident was now taught in ethics training modules. Amara's live stream was played in classrooms not for sensationalism, but as a turning point. Rookie officers began entering the force not just with physical training, but with legal awareness and cultural sensitivity. Meanwhile, Kevin's courtroom remained as disciplined and fair as ever. Defendants who once feared systemic bias now felt a flicker of hope knowing their case passed through a judge who had stood in their shoes, quite literally. And those who came to manipulate the system found no shortcuts in his courtroom. Justice, he often reminded his staff, wasn't soft. It was principled. At home, Kevin remained grounded. He still visited his father's grave every Sunday, still drove the Mustang to the courthouse each weekend, still reread his late father's notes about integrity and service. His younger sister, a school principal, often reminded him to take care of himself, and while he nodded, the weight of responsibility rarely let him rest. Public expectations had skyrocketed, and Kevin knew that if he faltered, reform would be painted as naive idealism. He picked it up out of habit, expecting another message from a colleague or perhaps an update from the Oversight Committee. Instead, the screen displayed the headline in bright red capital letters: Judge Wallace's secret backdoor deals with police, reform or self-promotion? A tabloid outlet Kevin had never granted an interview to had somehow obtained confidential details of his private meetings with law enforcement brass, including Commissioner Hayes and several precinct captains. The article painted his efforts not as collaborative reform, but as calculated political theater meant to position him for a rumored congressional run. Kevin's jaw clenched as he read the first paragraph, which distorted the truth so severely it felt like fiction. The piece quoted anonymous insiders, claiming that Kevin had leveraged his committee seat to push for personal political advancement and had quietly been building relationships with powerful law enforcement figures to control both sides of the reform debate. It even included a photo, cropped and out of context, from a closed-door budget meeting with the mayor and Commissioner Hayes. Within an hour, local news had picked it up. By noon, national outlets were discussing it. Social media, once his staunchest ally, had split in opinion. Some users defended him fiercely, citing his record, his courtroom history, and his integrity. Others latched onto the scandal, demanding investigations, calling him a fraud, a double agent for the system he claimed to be reforming. Hashtags that once honored his name now trended with suspicion. Kevin's phone rang again, this time with a call from Amara Johnson. Her voice was steady but worried. Judge Wallace, this isn't just noise. They're shaping a narrative. They want people to doubt you because if they can't discredit your work, they'll discredit your character. Kevin already knew that, but hearing it in her voice made it feel heavier. He assured her calmly that he was handling it, even though the pit in his stomach told him the situation was already spiraling. At that moment, Kevin realized the system wasn't just resisting, it was fighting back. And it wasn't aiming at his policies. It was aiming at him. He called an emergency meeting with the Oversight Committee. The faces on the video call were a mixture of concern and frustration. Helena Mendez, the civil rights attorney, spoke first. "They're testing us," she said bluntly. "They want to see if we'll fold under pressure." Officer Darius Lewis added, "We all knew this was coming. You rattled too many cages, Judge. Someone was always going to push back. Question is, do we play defense or offense?" Kevin, who had been silent up to that point, leaned forward. "We do neither," he said. "We stay the course. But we do it louder, with more transparency than ever. We don't counter smear with smear. We respond with facts and open records." Over the next 72 hours, Kevin released a full calendar of every closed-door meeting he had held since taking office on the committee. He issued signed statements from each attendee affirming that no personal favors, political ambitions, or ethical boundaries had been discussed or crossed. The mayor and Commissioner Hayes publicly confirmed the policy-focused nature of their meetings. Even the precinct captains involved issued brief statements to validate the reform-centric agenda Kevin had maintained. But the damage had been done. Cable panels debated whether Kevin's rise had been too clean to be believable. Pundits, who had never once covered his work, now speculated about future runs for state office, twisting his silence into confirmation. A segment on national news ran under the title Reform or Reputation Building. Meanwhile, in Kevin's courtroom, whispers replaced courtroom decorum. Defense attorneys eyed him differently, and prosecutors began second-guessing whether to ask for his input on sensitive cases. Even his clerk, a loyal staffer named Jordan who had been with him for 4 years, asked if the accusations had any truth. Kevin didn't flinch. "If I wanted politics," he told Jordan, "I wouldn't be risking my career to fix a broken system." I'd be using it to build a campaign. But perception, Kevin knew, had always mattered more than truth in the eyes of the public. And now the system was feeding the perception that he wasn't the reformer he claimed to be, but a player in the very game he sought to disrupt. The following day, during a public town hall on policing reform, a protester interrupted his remarks. She shouted, "How can we trust a man who dines with the very people we need protection from?" Kevin stood silently, allowing the moment to breathe. He then responded not as a politician, not even as a judge, but as someone who had once stood beside his father's Mustang, hands on the hood, accused without cause. "I meet with them because I refuse to change the system by yelling from outside the gates. I go in, I sit at the table, and I tell them what's wrong to their faces. I don't need a camera crew to prove I'm working. I need results. That's what justice looks like, whether it makes headlines or not." The room was quiet afterward, but the message was clear. Kevin would not retreat, and he would not perform. That night, an op-ed appeared in the city's largest paper, written by Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, a retired courthouse veteran and mother to the commissioner. She defended Kevin fiercely, detailing the humiliation she witnessed that day in the parking lot and the dignity with which he rose above it. "Judge Wallace," she wrote, "represents not just what's possible in a broken system, but what's necessary. They're trying to destroy his credibility because they know they can't destroy his impact." The public slowly began to rally again. The afternoon sun blazed down on the shopping plaza, catching every smartphone lens in its rays, reflecting off dozens of screens as the crowd now swelled to nearly 100 people, their faces shifting between curiosity, outrage, and disbelief as the live stream running from multiple angles fed tens of thousands online. And despite the weight of the moment, Kevin's mind remained razor-sharp, trained by years of litigation, testimony, and courtroom order to assess risk, analyze speech, and wield language like a scalpel, not a hammer. When Monroe demanded once again to search the vehicle, citing a vague report about a stolen car and ignoring both the lack of probable cause and the mounting presence of media attention, Kevin finally spoke in that same calm, even tone he'd used to overrule objections and deliver rulings on constitutional grounds, stating, "Officer, I'm invoking my Fourth Amendment rights. You are not authorized to search this vehicle or my personal effects without a warrant or clearly established probable cause." And the moment those words left his mouth, a ripple moved through the crowd, quiet murmurs giving way to murmured affirmation as people began to nod, to record even closer, to understand this wasn't a confused man stumbling through an unfortunate situation, but someone who understood his rights, the law, and how to use both to his advantage. Monroe blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in tone, her grip on authority slipping slightly as she radioed for backup yet again, using coded language that painted Kevin as non-compliant and the crowd as potentially hostile, words designed to shield herself in the inevitable report, to control the narrative before truth had a chance to breathe. But Sergeant Malcolm Harris, who had arrived moments earlier and stood just behind Monroe, took a step forward, his brow furrowed, his veteran instincts kicking in as he surveyed the scene, not with the urgency of Monroe's posture, but with a quiet suspicion that something wasn't quite right. The man in question didn't match the usual profile of a suspect, not in demeanor, not in speech, not in posture, and certainly not in confidence. And as Harris caught sight of a leather-bound portfolio on the passenger seat, just barely visible beneath a stack of neatly organized documents with an official-looking seal, he began to reassess the stop entirely, especially as the crowd's commentary swelled in volume and multiple voices shouted things like, "That man's a judge, and he knows the law better than you do," which only increased Harris's unease. Kevin, meanwhile, kept his composure, though internally he was calculating the exact moment to reveal his identity, aware that doing so too soon could escalate things further or be dismissed as bluster. While waiting too long risked permanent damage, not just to his own safety, but to the case waiting back at the courthouse, where his vote was the swing needed to pass a statewide reform bill on police conduct. Irony heavy in his chest as he thought about the urgency of a law meant to prevent exactly what was happening to him in real time. When Monroe attempted to open the car door without consent, Kevin stepped back slightly and said in a voice amplified for the crowd's benefit, "Ma'am, if you proceed to enter this vehicle without a warrant, You will be violating my constitutional rights, and you will be liable for any breach of privacy under both state and federal law." And that sentence, that clear, confident, legally airtight statement, caused Monroe to pause just long enough for Harris to step fully between them, raising one hand not in aggression, but to signal restraint, to indicate that this had gone far enough without clarity. And for the first time, Monroe hesitated. Harris turned to Kevin and asked, "Sir, may I ask your full name and your reason for being here today?" To which Kevin replied, still collected, "My name is Judge Kevin Wallace, Superior Court of California, Criminal Division, and I am here on personal time, driving my father's restored vehicle which I legally own, a fact I can confirm with registration and judicial identification inside my briefcase." And the air seemed to shift in that instant, Monroe stepping back as if burned, eyes narrowing as she glanced to Harris for support. But he was no longer posturing for authority. He was considering the implications of what had just been revealed, remembering that the Chief Justice had reported a judge missing earlier that afternoon. And as the pieces connected in his mind, his shoulders tensed with the weight of what this meant. Kevin continued, not raising his voice, but allowing the gravity of his words to do the work. "I have allowed this encounter to play out in full view because the eyes of the public are often the only safeguard against injustice." And as his phone buzzed for what must have been the 10th time, he finally said aloud, "That's the Chief Justice calling. I was expected to vote on a landmark case regarding police accountability until I was detained under false suspicion and denied the opportunity to identify myself." And with that, the crowd burst into a mix of gasps, indignation, and even some applause, while the live stream chat numbers surged into the 70,000s, and Harris, now pale, keyed his radio and requested immediate contact with Precinct Command, requesting a situation review and legal counsel on site, his voice steady but layered with undertones of alarm. Monroe looked at Kevin, her posture no longer confident but defensive. Kevin flipped open the flap, revealing the official seal of the Superior Court of California stamped in gold on a cream-colored identification card bearing his name, photo, and judicial credentials. And the second the badge glinted in the sunlight, the murmurs of the crowd exploded into audible gasps. Comments from the live stream viewers flew across Amara's screen faster than she could register. "He's a judge. She's finished. This is career-ending stuff." And Monroe, who had been posturing with authority just minutes earlier, took an instinctive step back as though distance might somehow shield her from the fallout, her posture crumbling, confidence evaporating beneath the weight of her misjudgment. Sergeant Malcolm Harris, seasoned enough to know the implications of every detail in the chain of events, let out a slow breath and immediately keyed his radio, calling off further backup and instructing Central Command to notify the precinct supervisor and legal liaison that an active incident had escalated to judicial misconduct, the word spoken in code, but unmistakable to those trained to read between every syllable. Kevin raised his voice slightly, not with anger, but with the firm authority he wielded on the bench daily, stating, "What you see here is not just an identification card, but 15 years of service in the criminal justice system, 15 years of presiding over cases just like this one, and 15 years of defending the very Constitution you attempted to deny me the protection of." And the ripple effect was instant. Monroe's jaw tightened as she struggled to find footing, stammering an attempt at an apology that never fully formed while Harris raised both hands slightly, signaling both retreat and concession. News vans screeched into the lot's entrance, reporters spilling out like first responders in tailored suits, microphones in hand, with Jennifer Martinez from Channel 7 leading the charge, her crew rushing forward to capture what had clearly become a breaking national story as hashtags like #JudgeWallace and #JusticeProfiled climbed trending charts in real time. Kevin continued, aware that the eyes of thousands, now likely hundreds of thousands, were watching, some in person, others through the virtual lens of live streaming smartphones and satellite feeds. And he spoke not just to the officers before him, but to the system they represented, saying, "This vehicle belonged to my father, Judge Robert Wallace, who served this county for 32 years with distinction, whose name you would have recognized had you bothered to ask, and whose legacy I now carry, not just through his car, but through his principles." And the words struck harder than any courtroom verdict. The crowd murmuring approval, support, even admiration as Kevin placed the ID on the Mustang's roof and retrieved the matching vehicle registration from a folder, holding it up for the camera to see, clearly dated and legally binding, linking the vehicle's ownership to his name without ambiguity. Monroe, now visibly shaken, attempted to interject with a defensive line about following protocol, but Kevin immediately countered. Protocol based on what? On assumption? On the color of my skin? Because the only consistent factor in your behavior today has been your refusal to listen, your refusal to observe, and your determination to criminalize an innocent man whose only offense was existing in a way that didn't conform to your expectations, and that, more than anything else, pierced through the layers of procedural justification Monroe had tried to hide behind. Harris, though clearly trying to remain neutral, now addressed Kevin with the deference due his position, saying, "Your Honor, we deeply regret how this situation unfolded, and I assure you it will be reviewed at the highest level." But Kevin, while nodding in acknowledgement, remained firm, replying, "Regret does not reverse damage. It merely acknowledges its presence. And today that damage extends not only to me, but to the integrity of the justice system you swore to uphold." And with that, he took a single step back, allowing the crowd a full view of his judicial ID, his registration, and his calm yet unwavering stance. Amara's stream surged past 100,000 viewers, the chat exploding with demands for disciplinary action, calls for Monroe's badge, and viral quotes from Kevin's speech already circulating as headlines and social media posts. And the reality of the situation finally settled in on Monroe, her face pale, lips pressed tight, her career flashing before her eyes, as she saw in vivid clarity that every choice she'd made had been broadcast, documented, and dissected by a public no longer willing to excuse profiling under the guise of duty. Kevin's phone buzzed once more, this time with a direct message from Chief Justice Langston himself, asking for immediate debrief and assuring Kevin that the judiciary had already been informed and was preparing a public statement. And still, Kevin did not gloat, did not seek revenge, but simply closed the portfolio, replacing it in his briefcase with the kind of deliberate precision that said the matter, in his eyes, was not closed, but merely paused until full accountability could be achieved. A young reporter tried to push forward for comment, but Harris stepped in, placing himself protectively in front of Kevin now, the reversal of roles complete. And as Kevin adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, straightened his posture. In the weeks following the incident at North Shore Plaza, the story of Judge Kevin Wallace transcended its viral status and became a landmark moment in the national conversation about race, policing, and the burden of assumption. News outlets ran continuous coverage, not just of the confrontation itself, but of the systemic failures it revealed and the reforms it began to demand. Officer Patricia Monroe, the woman who had, in one misguided traffic stop, unintentionally exposed the fragile balance between authority and prejudice, was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. But public opinion had already rendered a swift and unforgiving verdict. The footage captured by Mara Chang's now legendary livestream had reached over 5 million views, and calls for accountability filled public forums, editorial pages, and city council meetings. Meanwhile, Sergeant Malcolm Harris, who had stepped back during the confrontation with the awareness that the moment was larger than any badge, requested a formal meeting with Judge Wallace through his precinct commander, stating in his memo, "It is my professional and personal obligation to learn from what I witnessed." But Kevin, despite the support pouring in from legal professionals, civil rights advocates, and an ever-growing coalition of concerned citizens, didn't retreat into applause or vindication. He returned to work the following Monday, stepped onto the bench in Department 8, and resumed his docket with the same measured grace he had always shown, but now with a sharper sense of responsibility, not just for the cases before him, but for the culture that allowed what had happened in that parking lot to unfold so casually. At home, the 1967 Mustang sat quietly in his driveway, no longer just a nostalgic heirloom, but a vehicle, both literal and metaphorical, that had carried the truth into public view. Kevin kept it spotless, as his father once had, but now it bore new meaning. It had become a symbol of both history and reckoning. Chief Justice Langston personally invited Kevin to speak at the State Judicial Review Committee's annual conference, where Kevin delivered a keynote address titled "Judgment Before Justice." The unseen weight of assumptions, a speech that drew standing ovations and led to a unanimous vote to establish a statewide judicial police relations task force. During that speech, Kevin didn't focus on the humiliation he endured or the fact that his professional identity had been doubted based on nothing but appearance. He focused instead on the opportunity it had presented. He spoke about the mathematics of prejudice, that dangerous calculation where appearance plus wealth equaled suspicion, where blackness plus confidence equaled confrontation, and how, for that equation to be dismantled, the entire system had to be re-examined. We cannot simply retrain officers, he said to the silent audience of lawmakers, justices, and commissioners. We must retrain society. We must retrain the reflex that makes people ask what someone like me is doing in a place like that, driving a car like this, holding a job like mine. That reflex isn't just flawed, it's dangerous. At the precinct level, reforms began quickly. The police department implemented a mandatory 60-hour bias awareness training program, and officers were required to complete a certification process that included not just written exams, but community-led seminars where residents shared stories of profiling and marginalization. Kevin offered to participate in one such seminar, not as a judge, but as a man who'd been profiled. The officers who attended said the silence in the room during his story was heavier than any disciplinary warning they'd ever received. Amara, the college student whose live stream had sparked the digital wave of justice, was offered an internship with a national civil rights news outlet. Her video became required viewing in local police academies and was submitted for a Peabody Award in journalism. In her own reflection, she wrote, "I didn't realize that holding up my phone would hold up a mirror to America. I thought I was filming injustice. Turns out I was filming change." Back at the courthouse, Kevin received a handwritten letter from a former defendant he had sentenced 5 years prior. The letter read, "Your Honor, I didn't think I'd ever respect a judge. But what you did out there gave me faith in the system. You didn't shout. You didn't fight. You stood there with your hands on the hood until the truth had no choice but to reveal itself. That's real strength." Mrs. Betty Jackson, the elderly woman who had recognized Kevin at the scene, became a local hero. She was invited to speak at the city's Civil Rights Hall of Fame event and used her speech to advocate for better identification processes within police databases so that situations like Kevin's could never happen again. "We can't always see who someone is by looking at them," she said, "but we can always choose to listen before we judge." The police commissioner eventually held a press conference where he acknowledged institutional failure, announcing that the department would not only discipline Monroe, but also begin working alongside the newly formed Judicial Task Force to rebuild public trust. Kevin was appointed as co-chair of that task force. The final piece of closure arrived when Officer Monroe requested to meet with Kevin privately, without cameras, without reporters, just two individuals trying to understand the damage between them. Kevin agreed. In a small, quiet conference room at the courthouse, she apologized, not with excuses, but with clarity. "I didn't see a judge," she admitted. "I saw a stereotype. And that wasn't your failure. That was mine." Kevin listened, nodded, and then offered a path forward. "Your career doesn't have to end with this," he said, "but your mindset must. Justice doesn't care what someone looks like. Neither should the people who enforce it." When a story was finally adapted into a documentary titled Driving While Judged, Kevin narrated the final scene, walking beside the Mustang, past a row of murals painted by local students depicting scenes from the incident and from history. Rosa Parks, Thurgood Marshall, Kevin Wallace. "This isn't a story about a judge who got lucky," he says in the voiceover. "This is a story about what happens when we stop looking at people and start looking for the truth in them." In the end, Judge Kevin Wallace didn't seek revenge. He sought reform. He didn't deliver punishment. He delivered precedent. He didn't allow the moment to define him. He defined the moment. And in doing so, he reminded a nation that the law isn't something we just practice. It's something we must protect, even from itself. The end. Thanks for reading this far. If this story moved you or made you think, please consider liking the post and subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter or story. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of the plot so far? Where do you see the story heading next? Also, let me know where in the world you're watching or reading from. Drop a comment below. I read everyone and truly appreciate your insight. Your voice matters here. Let's keep the conversation going.